belong to you.
I belong to
you. Do just what you want. You're the one that tries.
What's going on for the Nation podcast listeners? This is your host, Mike Wojcik. I want to start this podcast off by saying if you know any veterans, law enforcement officers, or first responders who may be dealing with something, please reach out to them. You have no idea the magnitude and pain that can be alleviated by just sitting down and having a conversation with them. I want to remind you that not all injuries are visible. That said, this podcast is with two of the most amazing people, Steve Nisbet and Jennifer Byrne, both of whom are U.S. Air Force veterans who have joined together and created a 501c3 called Shields and Stripes. Shields and Stripes is looking to redefine the way that PTSD and mental health is cared for by taking a multifaceted therapeutic approach. If you take nothing else from this podcast, at least go check out their website at shieldsandstripes.org. If it's on your heart, donate. It costs about $5,000 to put a service member through therapy, and there's no charge to the service member. I was so humbled and honored to have this conversation. So without further ado, let's get to the episode. Okay, so we are now recording. I am joined today with Steve Nisbet and Jennifer Byrne. Steve is a veteran, the president and co-founder of Shields and Stripes, and Jennifer Byrne is a doctor of occupational therapy. Did I get that right?
You got it.
Awesome. And she is the vice president and co-founder of Shields and Stripes. Why don't you guys take a minute and just kind of discuss and introduce yourselves to the listeners. Steve, you can go first.
Sure. I'll take a minute just to introduce myself, and then we can get in kind of the story. So my name's Steve Nisbet. So grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Went to college for about a year. I studied astronomy and realized that was not the path for me, even though I love space and I was a space nerd. That I just looked around at who was around me, and I thought I could do more. I had more in me than sitting in a classroom and looking at telescopes, even though I enjoyed it. But I was 19 years old at the time, or 18. Joined the military in 2005 to become an Air Force PJ or pararescueman. A special operations career field in the Air Force. Finished that entire pipeline in 2008, so it was about a 2.5-year pipeline, and then went off to a special tactics squadron in Okinawa. Spent 3 years there, and then another 3 years at the rescue squadron in Las Vegas. And then I assessed to our Tier 1 organization at the 24th STS, and spent the last 8 years or the remainder of my career there until I ultimately medically retired. So married my wife in 2006 in August, and then we had 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. Their ages right now are 12, 9, and 4, and they are ever growing fast, and so are their attitudes. So that's me in a nutshell without getting into why we started. So pass that over to Jen.
Awesome. All right. And again, my name is Jen Byrne. You got that pronunciation right, so thank you. I'm also a veteran. I grew up in Groton, Connecticut, went to school at the University of New Hampshire, where I got my bachelor's and master's degree in occupational therapy. Got my commission as a second lieutenant into the United States Air Force in May of 2012, finished my master's degree, and entered active duty in the Air Force as an occupational therapist in January of 2014. During that time, I spent quite a bit of time embedding with different units and had the privilege of developing the Air Force's first sports medicine team for pararescue, combat controllers, TACTs, and what was then called SAUT trainees. So that's up and running and still very successful at Medina in Texas. So that's where I really was able to learn about, different specialties. So with OT, I would see a hand injury or hand amputation during one appointment, and then would be assessing someone for PTSD another appointment, and maybe talking to someone else about sleep performance for another appointment. So very holistic profession. got married to my husband, who is a combat rescue officer, in 2016. And we had our first child, Ellie. She's 1.5 in February 2020. I decided to separate from the Air Force in November of 2020 for a lot of different reasons, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that I could do more on the outside, so decided to separate. And basically opened my own business, and that business led me to connecting with Steve, which led me to being the co-founder and the vice president of Shields and Stripes.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to quickly touch on occupational therapy just because my fiance, and actually when this comes out this Saturday, we are getting married. So my wife, soon to be.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, thank you.
Congrats.
Thank you. But yeah, so she's an occupational therapist as well, and it took me a long time to really understand what occupational therapists do, because if you just read it like occupational therapist, you're thinking like, oh, they help you get back to work. Well, not really. And I think a term that gets used a lot in the field is they treat the whole self. Does that sound right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So
the way that I explain occupational therapy to people is, we are really the experts on disability. So what that means is, mental, neurological, physical. When you go through medical school, you become an MD, and then you train for a specialty. It's very similar in the OT world. Like, you go through OT school, you get your OT credentials, and then you really focus on a specialty. And traditionally that's, either mental health, or some people go into brain injuries, some people go into upper extremity orthopedic rehab. So it's very much holistic, and no matter what specialty you choose, occupational therapy is always and constantly assessing the whole person. So even if someone comes into me with a finger amputation, well, I'm still assessing their home life. I'm still assessing their motivation. I'm looking into whether they have any comorbidities of depression, because that's going to negatively impact their ability to get better. So it's very holistic in nature.
Yeah, I think that's a very good recap and summary of what OTs do. I think that, and I heard this in the office, and I catch myself now. I'm like a fan of OTs, and someone in the office says, "Well, OTs just do like upper extremities," and I like quickly blurted out, "No, that's not true. It's way more than that. I don't have the time to really get into it, but it's more than that. Just know that." So thank you for clearing that up for people.
Man, I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for clearing that up for people, because the big secret is I actually hate hand therapy. So I'd be in big trouble if that's all OT did.
Yeah. Well, luckily there's not. There's lots of different settings, and like you said, different fields to get in within OT. With that, I'm going to take it back to Steve, and the story that you shared with me the last time we spoke is one of the most incredible and just emotional stories that I've heard in a really long time, and has really stuck with me since. So why don't you share that story and share with the listeners how Shields and Stripes really got its feet on the ground?
Certainly. So I'll go back to 2019 in about May timeframe. I had over about a period of, at that time, 9 combat deployments. And so seeing a lot of my friends get killed, injured, a lot of teammates place a lot of flags, U.S. flags over body bags. And so I dealt with a lot over those past deployments, mostly to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Africa. And so in that time period, I started to notice some significant memory loss. And I started to attribute that to what I thought was TBIs. So people that I would know, I've known for 10 years, I would see them and I just wouldn't know who they are. I wouldn't know their name or exactly how I knew them. I just recognized them. And so that identified as a problem, especially as it became more frequent. Went to our therapists and said, like, hey, this is what's happening to me. Can we get some testing? So we did some cognitive testing, and they said, hey, you're pretty superior in just about every category that we have, except for one, which is attentiveness, which usually is indicative of PTSD. And so at the time, I didn't believe I had it because of traditionally what you see in TV and movies and things like that. I was like, I don't have what you see on TV. And, fine, I'm just doing my job and, as everybody else is. And so as I started to see in the therapists that are embedded within our unit, and as Jen referenced, our POTF staff, if you will, it's preservation of the force and family staff, which comprises of nutrition coaches, dietitians, physical therapists, strength conditioning coaches, occupational therapists in some locations, and then psychologists and social workers. I started leaning on the psychologists and identifying different symptoms that I didn't really know I had, or at least didn't pay attention to. So some of those being distance from the family, a lot of irritability, angry outbursts, depression, anxiety, sleep disorders. And then one that I found to be pretty significant, which is I just didn't enjoy doing my job anymore. I was just there to show up, execute the mission or whatever the training iteration was, and go home rather than actually really enjoying what I was doing. And so it came to a head when my wife came up to me and pulled me aside and said, hey, your two boys are scared of you. And they're, I think, 9 and 7 at the time, or around that age. And so that kind of hit me pretty hard. And so I started leaning on that therapist and how I could fix this problem. And I would say in October, I started to feel a lot better and more my old self. Started enjoying what I was doing. I was the team leader of a group of our team members, so combat controllers and PJs. And so 5 of us went out to Boise, Idaho to do more of a morale building trip. We were going to do some lead climbing and some mountain rescue out on the Black Cliffs, and spent our Monday out there, had some great climbs. On the Tuesday, we also had some really good climbs, finishing out the day. And as we finish up that last 70-foot face, one of our guys starts to rappel down. I'm doing some instruction. It's a beautiful day. Guy gets down to the bottom safely and starts cleaning up his gear to get ready to pack up and head home. Second individual gets set up and he starts his rappel. And about halfway down, I hear kind of like a loud bang behind me, sound like a gun blast. Turn around and I see rope zipping off over the edge on the ground. And I didn't really compute what was happening in my brain. And then I saw one of our guys trying to pull that rope back, and he was going with it and he couldn't stop, and he eventually went over the edge. And so what happened is one of the guys that was on the rope, the anchor failed, or the rock failed around the anchor. The guy that was on the rope, he fell about 30 feet and hitting some of the rocks on the way down. And his weight pulled one of our other guys off of the very top of that cliff face. So he fell full 70 feet. And so as I watched him go over the edge, I was in the middle of instructing one of our other teammates kind of how I like to build anchors, and saw him going over and purposely flip over to his back. I think he was anticipating trying to land at a downward slope, but he didn't quite make or reach that distance. And so he ended up impacting the ground on his back. And there was actually a very large stone that I had been standing on before climbing, and he landed right onto that stone. And it was about the size of his back. And so impacted that, bounced over to his face. And I could hear kind of a groaning coming out of his mouth. And so I thought, at least, he's going to be really injured. He's paralyzed, but I can hear a noise. So at least he's still alive. And so one of our other guys, or the guy that was up there with me, he got a little bit, very concerned. So I tried to calm him down, get his attention on, this is what I need you to do when we get down there. He was a medic, I was a medic, and the guy that fell off, he was also our medic. Instructed one of our guys down there to feel for a pulse and listen for breathing. He said he had one. I started my descent, and then he said he lost the pulse and didn't hear him breathing anymore. I told him not to move him until I got there. Got to the bottom, went over, did another check, couldn't feel a pulse, didn't hear him breathing. Rolled him over. As I rolled him over, I could feel that he had a broken neck and he had a broken arm. I could see and a gash on his face, and tried to look, listen, feel again, and still had nothing. And so at that time, I had one of our controllers start doing some CPR on him. Asked for our other medic, to go get a med bag. He brought me an airway kit. I tried to intubate him, but I didn't want to manipulate his neck too much, and I couldn't confirm that the tube was placed in his trachea, and so I had to be sure. I had to make sure that 100% that was in there. So with dirt and blood in his mouth, it made it very difficult. And without manipulating his neck, I opted for a cricothyroid surgical airway. And so that being, I had to cut into his neck and then put a tube into his throat through that hole that I made. That was a successful placement, and we started bagging from there. And we knew that he probably had some sort of lung damage, whether that be a hemo or a pneumothorax. So Josh, one of our other PJs, did a finger thoracotomy, which is like a chest tube without the chest tube in the field. So we made the incision on the left side and rolled him to a side, and I would say about half a liter to a liter of blood keep pouring out. So that was a significant amount. And here I am, looking at the other team, and most of them hadn't experienced this type of loss before, at least a teammate like this and this close, and having to treat them. Two of them were combat controllers with very little and minimal medical experience, and the other one was a younger PJ. So his exposure was not quite as much as mine was. So I'm trying to mind them and make sure that they're mentally okay. And we get the fire department to come up there. So then about 25 minutes of us working them until the fire department got to us. Mind you, we're about 400 meters away from the road and about 500 to 600 foot elevation difference. It's pretty significant distance away. So once the fire department got there, they placed pads on him and then ultimately pronounced him dead there at the scene. And so that right there was a moment of what just happened. Like, I can't believe this just happened, and lost a lot of teammates, as I said in the past, but this one was very different. I lost them in training, and I was a team leader, and we were talking about where we were going to dinner that night just moments ago, and his wife was pregnant at the time, and they already had a 2-year-old baby at the time, and so all those things are going through my mind as far as what's happening next, the memorial, the funeral, the notification process, and it became overwhelming. So I called up my boss and I essentially said, like, hey, this is the last flag I'm going to pin on a teammate in my career. I don't want to do this anymore. And ultimately, I pulled myself off a team to lean back on those resources that I described earlier, specifically the therapist. And I spent 2 months in really intense therapy working on my symptoms, mostly guilt and blame, shame from it, and depression, anxiety, the nightmares, working on all those things to get back to being functional rather than depressed all the time. So after about 2 months of that, I came back as a team leader. The team wanted me back, and I felt good enough to be back. And about 36 hours after coming back, we got notified on a short notice deployment. So got notified at 8 a.m. and by noon we were flying out to a location to deploy. And so while out there, though it was semi uneventful, not a lot happened, but it was a successful deployment. We were there for 2.5 months. Came back, I regained confidence in my leadership skills and my skills as a PJ, and I was ready to fully lead the team and with 100% confidence, and getting ready for our next actual deployment in May, and preparing the team for that. We had a lot of training going on, and then in April the investigation closed out for that accident in Boise, and they found ultimately what we expected, is that it was an accident. There's nothing we could have done to prevent it, and there's nothing we could have done to save his life. If he had landed on an operating table, you still would have had the same outcome. Nonetheless, the military had to hold somebody accountable, and they held me as the team leader accountable. And with that, I was removed from my position as team leader, so essentially fired. And then I was also removed from that unit that I had worked so hard to get to. And to get to this unit, it's a whole nother selection process and a whole nother 10 months of training. So it was the tip of the spear, is where I wanted to be, and I worked so hard to be there. And I was pretty well respected there, and all that was just stripped away. So you can imagine now my confidence is completely shot. I'm back to blaming myself and having guilt. And now I had something to show the therapist. I had a piece of paper saying, look, right here, it is my fault. On this piece of paper, it says it's my fault. And she had spent 6 months convincing me that it wasn't my fault. So she wasn't too thrilled about that outcome and what happened. And now she had a lot of work to do to get me back to where I just was. I was given 30 days to PCS and to move to another duty station. And that would have been out in Las Vegas. And as I looked to the future of that potential move, I saw a downward spiral, a bad path. They didn't have the resources that we had at this unit, at least to the extent that we do. Any therapist doesn't have a context or continuity care of what I just went through. And I would have had the means to destroy myself, being gambling, alcohol, potential drug use, and I couldn't do that to my family at the time. And so my hand was essentially forced to pursue a medical retirement just so I could stay at the unit and continue receiving the care through the therapist I was using. And through her, I have no doubts that she, figuratively and literally saved my life, because of the great work that she did. And in that time frame, this is when COVID is really kicking off, and a lot of media exposure to some of our law enforcement folks. And I saw in the videos that I saw myself or my old self in them. High stress, always in the red, always ready to explode at a moment's notice, because they're living in constant fear of potential death, that they might die at any moment. So they're constantly ready, and living in that state, it pays a heavy toll, physically and mentally. And so I started looking up the resources that they have available to them, and there wasn't very many, at least to the extent that I have here at this unit. So I thought, man, like, they could probably use the resources I had, but more than I could have. So how do we get that to them? And met Jen through LinkedIn. She was running 5x5 performance therapy, and it had the same vision, had the same mission that I wanted. And so her and I started collaborating, and then came up with the idea of Shields and Stripes, and wanted to host a program for our law enforcement and firefighters and other first responders, as well as the veterans, to go through a 4-week program and have them receive the same resources of strength conditioning coaches, nutritionists, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and psych treatment, in a very holistic, body, mind, and spirit, of getting better. And then once they leave there, we have to have that follow-up care to make sure that they're taking what they learned there with them. And so Jen proposed 12 weeks of virtual therapy, and we really, that's what we're going to do is another 12 weeks of once or twice a week with the family, because that's just as important, if not more important, to include the family in this, and get that virtual therapy in there. So 4 weeks in person, 12 weeks virtual, and we truly believe that amount of time can really change a human and their experiences, and ultimately save their life if they were contemplating taking their own life. I mean, we know the suicide rates on the rise, so we want to combat that at all costs. So we're in the process of really developing this program, and we've got a really nice pilot study that Jen set up. I'll let her talk about that coming up next week, and we're looking forward to the future. So that's the story of the inception, and I'll let that slip over back to you, Mike, and then over to Jen.
Yeah, of course. I think first off, that story it's almost like a speechless story. You hear it and you don't know what to say, because it really shows, the mountains and the valleys that is life and that you can go through. And I want to have a quick conversation about PTSD and mental health, just because I feel like, especially in the law enforcement, military, that first responder type industry or career field, mental health and PTSD is kind of this weird taboo subject where, yeah, you get training on it and we learn a lot about it, but it never, at least from what I see, it never actually, there's no meaningful conversation or meaningful deliberation about what it is. So I think if I could kind of, walk through your story, Steve, when you were first when you first started not recalling things, was that like the moment where you realized like something's weird? Like, is there anything other than like the lack of memory? Was like, I assume that you went through some pretty crazy stuff beforehand, and how do you like internalize that? Or is it just something that compounds on itself and, you know, shows its ugly face later on in life? Like, what is the process of, I guess, getting PTSD?
I would say it compounds. You don't really know it because we get into this job and we're prepared. I got into this prepared, mentally prepared to see what I was going to see, throughout my deployments, ranging from, very low threat scorpions, going and picking up people that get stung by scorpions, to mass casualties were multiple amputees. And one specific was an IED blast up in the northeastern part of Afghanistan, and picking up the body parts of 3 coalition forces members and putting them in a body bag, and then flying their bodies to their fob and picking up flags, putting their flags on the bodies, and that whole process. And it's just your job at the time. That's what you're thinking about. This is my job, and it doesn't hit you till later. The small things like a helicopter was doing a hover actually at Bagram Air Base on one of the deployments, and it got hit by a rocket that got fired from off a base, and it just had that lucky $1 million shot, and that helicopter crashed, and 2 or 3 people died inside of their coalition forces, and pulling their bodies out. Their skin was all, they were on fire, they were cooked, and so pulling them by their legs, you could their meat and their, I guess, their muscles and their skin pulled down, and they were just exposed bone. And then we got to go eat dinner or lunch later, and it looks exactly the same of what this body looked like. And so you just don't eat that. And I just started eating cereal all the time rather than the meat that I probably needed to sustain myself. And so over those periods of lulls, highs and lows as far as stress goes, you get used to it, and then you block out, those portions that were high stress. You block out those, the gruesome things that you see, and then it becomes so routine that I think your mind gets so good at it that now it starts to block out things that you should be remembering, important things in your life, like weddings, birthdays, things like that. And I started not remembering those things, and I can't remember most of the things throughout my last 12 years of my life because it became so routine. And I would say that was the first thing that I was able to open the door with, even though I knew, like, I could sense my irritability. I knew at times when I overreacted. I knew it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. And then that memory loss was a way for me to say, hey, like, this is a safer way for me to ask this question, rather than saying, hey, I'm being a dickhead, or, I'm being a jerk.
Yeah.
To people, and maybe maybe it's caused by these other things, and another point would be I'd be pushing my kids on the swing, and I'm not, I wasn't paying attention to them at all. I was just staring off into space. I'm here, but I'm not,
Yeah.
and I wasn't even thinking about anything. I wasn't thinking about history. I was just foggy. I just wasn't there. And my brain was just shut off. No thoughts, just pushing on the swing. And I should have been paying attention to my kids, living with my kids, and being in the moment with them, because it passes so quickly. And so that, to answer your question, I would say that memory loss was a safer way for me to open the door and ask the question. And I remember specifically, an email came across of in our group, in our organization, that goes out to the entire group. And she wasn't my therapist at the time, but she sent out an email, and she said, hey, we're having a PTSD discussion in this room, show up and we can learn. And I was like, okay, I'll show up. It turns out that discussion got moved, and I didn't know about it, and I ended up walking on a meeting with our group commander and group chief, and So that was a fun experience. But nonetheless, I went back and emailed her and said, hey, what do people come up to you and ask you like about PTSD? Like, I don't know if I have it. How do I know if I have issues? And then that's when the door opened of, hey, I have memory loss problems, and now what other problems aren't I identifying? And when I talk about nightmares, I don't classify it as a nightmare, but it's a recurring dream that I had at least 5 or 6 nights a week, and it's always me about to shoot somebody, and as I'm squeezing the trigger, it's almost like it's 1,000-pound trigger pull, and then it gets to the back, and there's just nothing there. There's no bang, there's no click. It's just nothing. Not scary, not terrifying. Didn't make me wake up in a panic, but it was every single night the same thing. And so that's what she classified as the nightmare. Hey, those are nightmares. So that's when that sleep disorder came in, and really doing these other studies like a sleep study. And I have sleep apnea. I'm, in my mid 30s, and I have sleep apnea. I consider myself a pretty healthy guy. Work out quite a bit, but my body tries to kill itself at night for some reason.
That's crazy. The that dream, it makes me feel like, just the way you said it, makes me feel like you're just getting all this tension, like a bunch of tension, and it just gets exponentially more tense, and then there's no release from it. It just you just wake up, and there's no climax to the moment. Like there's no release of that tension. It's just pent up energy. That's
right.
That's hard to live with in all aspects of that. I guess I'll kick this now to Jen. And how do you diagnose PTSD? Because I feel like there's so many different symptoms and ways that it shows itself. So how do you pinpoint something to PTSD?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first off, as an occupational therapist, specifically in the OT realm, we don't diagnose it. That's going to be a medical doctor diagnosing it. Now, there's something called a diagnostic statistic manual, right? And there's this book. And when I say medical doctor, I should also say mental health professionals. They use a diagnostic statistic manual, which really goes through very specific categories of symptoms and how long the symptoms have lasted in order to get a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. So some of the big points according to that DSM manual is that there has to be some kind of a stressor, persistent re-experiencing, the person is avoiding some things, there are negative thoughts and feelings, they have different behaviors and emotional responses, which really just says, hey, this person is experiencing something negative and it's affecting their everyday life. And in order to get the actual diagnosis, it has to occur for over 1 month. But I think what's really, really important in this conversation about post-traumatic stress disorder is that the disorder, the D on this, is being relooked at. And that's why you're seeing a lot of people refer to PTSD as PTS. Because as a whole, and when I say whole, I mean medical community and people like Steve who have experienced these kinds of things themselves, we know that some kind of post-traumatic stress reaction to something really, really traumatic and really terrible is very normal. So the way that the human body operates and the way that the human brain operates, if you see something like the things that Steve has seen and has been exposed to, well, of course, the brain is going to react differently, and you're going to go through a period of symptoms. But the problem becomes when these symptoms start affecting your everyday life. So Steve just said it beautifully. When he's pushing his kids and he's not there. When his wife came up to him and said that his children were scared of him. He talked about being in the red all the time. So it really comes down to, if you've got a traumatic experience and it's negatively impacting your everyday life, including, work and family and social, then that's when the conversation really becomes, hey, is this a disorder? And is this a disorder that you need to receive treatment for?
All right. And then another question surrounding So should I refer to it as PTS? Like, is it better to say that, or is that just an ongoing discussion that the medical community is having?
Well, I think it really depends, right? So when someone is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, yeah, that's absolutely PTSD. But when we're having a conversation about, the trauma that people experience and their reaction to trauma, well, then it may be more appropriate to really talk about it as a more normal reaction to something really traumatic, which is post-traumatic stress. So it's really the difference between, what is very normal for the human brain to react and how and the duration of time. Is someone able to recover after a month, or do these symptoms continue for multiple months, multiple years? So if you're talking about it in the broad context, I'd say post-traumatic stress. But if you're talking about someone who had, a real challenge overcoming this, like Steve, it's totally appropriate to say, hey, talk to me about your PTSD.
All right. And then I guess this question it's kind of like a two-parter. The broad question would be, how does it manifest itself? Because I think a lot of people confuse PTSD with depression, and they associate PTSD with depression and manic actions. So how does it normally manifest itself? Is there like a specific certain things that it does, or is there ways that maybe are not as known?
Yeah. So, one of the biggest points about post-traumatic stress disorder is that when you're experiencing these negative symptoms, in order to differentiate depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, the first question is, okay, was there a single traumatic event, right? And the answer can be yes for both. But the differentiating factors for post-traumatic stress disorder really come down to a couple of very specific symptoms. So some kind of re-experiencing of the event. For Steve, that was his daily dreams, which were later, classified as nightmares. So consistently and persistently re-experiencing a single traumatic event or something to do with the event. And then other things are avoidance. And then, basically a change in behavior after that traumatic event happened. So those are, it's kind of hard because everybody has a different brain.
Yeah.
And I think what's really important for everyone to know is that these are brain injuries. Even when we're talking about major depression, it's a chemical imbalance in your brain, as is what's going on with PTSD and the way that the fear center is reacting, which is the amygdala, and the way that the hippocampus is acting, which is exactly what Steve talked about in the memory center. But the biggest things is there a traumatic event? Are you reliving that traumatic event in some way? Are you avoiding it? And have you changed? Like, do you feel like your personality has changed? And also, is this occurring over 1 month? And with major depression, that can really manifest much differently. Not being interested in anything anymore, feeling very lethargic, feeling hopeless about the future. Those are the big points and the differentiating factors between the two.
Yeah. Great. And I kind of want to move now into the treatment part of this. And that would be, you guys mentioned earlier, Steve specifically, he mentioned the suite of therapies that was available to him, or the resources available to him in order to combat this. So can you walk me through what's out there, what kind of treatments are out there?
Sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the traditional model of what's out there, and then I'll walk you through what we are going to offer and how that's completely different.
Awesome. And so, while you're doing that, then we'll talk about the pilot study.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
So right now, Steve talked about something called the POTIF support team. And what that is exactly what you said. It's a multidisciplinary approach to care. What that means is that there's multiple professionals with a lot of different backgrounds treating the person together. And that seems like it just makes sense, right? And it does. It does make sense, which is why we're moving where we're moving with Shields and Stripes. But the problem is in the traditional medical model and what's out there right now is that if someone isn't privy to these POTUS teams, so that means that they're not, some kind of special operator in the military, if they're feeling badly, if they think that they're at risk for depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, then they have to go to a doctor. They have to go to an MD, and or a physician or a primary care doctor, and sometimes they aren't the best to provide holistic treatment for this. So a lot of times when we're talking about the medical model, it's all right, well, why don't you check off these boxes. Let's try some antidepressants. Let's try some medication for X amount of time and see if that works. And there are no discussions about changing habits. There's nothing about nutrition. There's nothing about exercise. There's nothing about sleep. And it's not necessarily a problem with the doctor. It's a problem with our system. When the doctor's schedule only allows for 20 minutes to see that person, then they're not going to be able to hit on anything that they really need to. So the system is failing people, in my personal opinion. I believe Steve's personal opinion as well, which is why we at Shields and Stripes, we're really charging forward, and we're going to redefine the way that medicine is considered and also provided for the people that deserve it the most. So instead of 20 minutes in medication, it's taking a holistic approach, and that's where we go back to the multidisciplinary team. Well, the registered dietitian, they're the expert in diet, so let's really get them on board and attack the nutrition piece. The physical therapist, okay, what kind of injuries are you suffering from? Because pain can absolutely decrease your mental state and your ability to get better, and so on and so forth. So the medical model doesn't allow for that. And that's why Shields and Stripes is going to redefine that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like, and especially being a veteran myself and having been to, on post medical, it feels like they just push pills. Like there's no actual treatment. Like they see you for about 15 minutes. And that's maybe if you're like with the doctor is only in there for the last 5, if that. And you feel kind of just slighted, and they just give you a bunch of medicine and call it a day. And if it doesn't work, you come back, they do the same thing. And it's this repeating cycle. So I, for one, completely agree and support the fact that you're redefining the system of medicine and, treating like it's kind of like this this pattern, and we keep touching on it, but treating the whole person. One thing that I want to touch on is you guys keep saying nutrition, and Steve, I'd like to hear your perspective on this. When they offered nutrition as a part of PTSD treatment, were you kind of opposed to that at first? What was your thought?
No, certainly not. And we hired a registered dietitian at our squadron. And I think they're really still trying to figure out how do they apply it appropriately. I think Exos right now has a really, really excellent model. They have them go through a good nutrition plan based off of their goals, what they're trying to achieve, their body type, their size, weight goals, things like that. And then give them really good education as far as, what types of meats that you should eat, what type of diet plans you want to be on if you have limitations that you take. So, for example, some guys are on the keto diet or vegetarians and things like that. But they give you some really good knowledge on, to choose what you want. And then they build you a meal plan based off of that. And then what's nice at Exos is they provide that food for you. within our unit. And I was fortunate enough to go through that program. And so I really enjoyed that. That was, fantastic treatment. And I still have the sheets and I still use them to this day. What we have at the unit, I think is something similar. They do the coaching. Here's what you should have. Here's what you should maintain. It's really difficult in the military for us though, because there's nothing consistent. Like, we're TDY, I was TDY, some years, 270 to 300 days out of the year, I was gone. Whether that's deployments and trips out somewhere or being on alert somewhere. So being able to have a good, consistent meal plan was very challenging. And then when you're deployed, depending on where you're at, you're either eating local food out there, you're eating at a chow hall, which, doesn't have the most, high performing food.
Gotta love those eggs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get some gray broccoli. This isn't good. Or MREs, if you're out in the field, or going on the front lines. So being able to maintain that's very challenging. But at least if you have education around it, you can make your body, you can continue to perform well. And then one other thing that we really honed on, which I used, and several of us used, I would say the entire squadron used, repetitively, was biomarkers. So getting a blood test and then seeing where your levels were, and using a specific application that showed you where your inflammation was, how much inflammation you had, how much, where your testosterone levels were at, where your lipid scores were. And then it gave you a meal plan based off of that. And so how do you adjust, your body according to the things that you put inside of your body, to start performing better? And if we're performing better and we're feeling better, that only helps you out as far as your mental health. And so that's all ties back into that, physical, mental, and spiritual piece as far as a holistic, treatment plan. We got to physically take care of ourselves, and then we also have to eat the right things to make sure that we're not lethargic and lazy and not feeling good in the morning, don't recover well at night because we didn't eat the right things or drink enough water, and then going into our mental health support. So nutrition is a huge part, and early on in my career it wasn't very well harped on, and now it's hit very early on in the career. So at least for the new guys that are coming through, which is great. So now we got some giants coming through the pipelines.
I think too, just to chime in on that, a lot of people ask me when I'm doing my own personal business stuff, like, well, I don't understand. What does food have to do with mental health? And my response is, what doesn't it have to do with mental health? Like, think of the way you feel after you eat a bunch of carbs, like a big pizza. You're not able to concentrate. It's going to affect your decision making. And that's because what you put into your body has a direct effect on your brain health, which is all those chemicals within the brain, which then has everything to do with your mood. So I think, we're getting there, especially the military and within special operations is doing a really good job, like Steve said, kind of tying in how nutrition has to do with mental health, because we all know how it has to do with physical health, but it's a component that we simply cannot miss, because we know now that what we put into our body is overall physical, mental, cognitive health, and that's what we need to be happy humans.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that called the vagus nerve? Am I thinking of something completely different? Is it like there's like a gut-brain connection that is not really talked about so much, but it kind of is hitting on what you're saying, where like food will play a direct it'll play a direct role in your mood.
Yeah. And you're quizzing me here, so I can't remember if it's the vagus or the varus.
Oh, maybe it is varus. I don't know. It's one of those, but at least it starts with a V. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. There's a lot of things within the anatomy and physiology, if you really break it down, that ties food directly to mental health. And there's an old saying, I don't really remember who said it, someone super famous, about, the doctor of the future is going to be able to treat illnesses via nutrition. And I think we're getting there. I think we're realizing as a medical community and as a country and honestly as just world citizens that we did the wrong thing for the past 20 years. And, out of that grew the opioid crisis, for example. So we're getting back to really understanding the way that food impacts our body. And we have to be even more specific these days as we're approaching food and artificial everything. So it's just an important element that we know at Shields and Stripes needs to be integrated into all treatment plans.
That's awesome. Amen to that. All right, so let's talk about the pilot study that's happening. Why don't you kind of walk through what's going on with the pilot study and what folks will be going through?
Yeah, that sounds great. So we know that this model works within special operators, and we know it because there's research articles out there, and also there are plenty of people who will tell you that it works. Steve being one of them. He experienced 3 events within the matter of a year, and he was able to get immediate high quality care. And he says that it saved his life. So we know that this model works, but the problem is that we cannot for sure say that this model works for first responders, police officers, firefighters, and other non-SOF veterans. So we think that our concept is great, right? But that's not good enough when we are trying to provide the best for the people that deserve the best. We need to gather research that proves that what we think is going to happen is going to happen. So this is actually super exciting because at the same time, so research is important, but at the same time, we get to positively impact 4 people. So what we're doing is we're partnering with Exos. Exos is a high performance organization out here in Gulf Breeze, and there's a couple other ones, one in Arizona as well. And they really do a great job focusing on physical performance, nutrition, basically like the musculoskeletal system and the nutrition that it requires to support it. So what we've done is we've partnered with Exos, and we are using some of their staff and their model, but we're really putting our own Shields and Stripes spin on it, and also bringing in a psych to make sure that we've got that one-on-one mental health care that's required. And I'll also be treating as the occupational therapist. So bringing in things like yoga, breathing techniques, sleep performance, really tying in all of these other elements. So it's physical therapy, nutrition, massage therapy, psych, and occupational therapy. So that's going to be next week. And again, the 4 participants are one's a firefighter, one is a police officer, one is a retired Navy veteran, and one is a female active duty Air Force member. So we're bringing all them in and we're putting them through this model, and we're providing it in person for 1 week. And then after they graduate from the 1 week in-person session, where they get all of these different specialties, they go home and we provide them with 3 weeks of telehealth, so virtual therapy. And this is a big differentiator between us and other people that offer something similar out there. This is really important because we want to make sure that the things that they've learned and the concepts they've learned in person transition to the work and home environment. So we want to make sure that the spouses and that the family members are very much actively involved in their total rehabilitation. So we pull in the family members and the spouses to be a part of this 3-week telehealth therapy within the pilot. Now, our full program is 4 weeks in person, 12 weeks of telehealth. So right now it's really just a snapshot to gather that initial research, but we're going to be able to do that. And we hope that the research is on our side. Obviously, fingers crossed, we have a strong feeling that it will be. So that way we can continue to collect the research that not only does Shields and Stripes work, but this multidisciplinary model works as well.
That's incredible. Who's conducting all the research? Is it you and the Exos team, or?
Nope. So it's going to be Shields and Stripes, our team. So the IRB is going to the University of St. Augustine. So I have pulled in a professor of occupational therapy at the University of St. Augustine. Her name is Sunny. She's also a PhD student. So she is running the very specific research, data gathering, and SPSS analysis. So it's going to be quantitative to give us like concrete numbers, but the biggest piece of it is really going to be qualitative. Asking how this model works, how it has positively impacted their lives, and then we follow up with them at the 3, 6, and 12-month intervals to also assess the long-term effects of it.
That's incredible. That's so exciting. I'm sure a lot has gone into this moment.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited. I think next week is going to be beautiful because it's the first time that the Shields and Stripes team gets to see what happens and what has gone into all of their hard work in fundraising and administrative tasks. We get to actually see it take place with real humans. And I think it's going to be a game changer for our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. And I know that it's going to work out. I mean, just from, everything that I've seen and the way that you guys share your passion about this, it's almost like it's a no-fail mission anyway. And like you said, you're helping 4 people along the way, and hopefully you're creating long-lasting impacts in their lives.
Yeah, I think so. I have a feeling that people are probably going to be a part of the Shields and Stripes family for a really long time. So we're just really exciting. We're really excited for this. And what we're going to be able to do with the research too is basically present to people the hard facts. Like, hey, this works, and we know this works because of this process. And oh, by the way, check out what these people have to say about how we were able to positively impact their lives in 4 weeks. And oh, by the way, the real program is 4 times that.
Yeah.
So we're really hoping to, gain attention, and be able to grow Shields and Stripes the way that we know it needs to grow.
Absolutely. So the pilot study is being done in Florida. Where is the actual, once this is actually off the ground and the pilot study's in and y'all are kicking butt and, really helping people out there, where's the actual Shields and Stripes going to be taking place?
Go ahead, Steve.
So in 10 years from now, in 20 years, hopefully all over the nation. Within the next year or two, our initial plans are to have one here in North Carolina, either in Raleigh or just south of Raleigh, and then another one in Phoenix, Arizona. So ideally, I want to start it off with an east branch and a west branch, and that way we can hit both coasts of the U.S. and it'll be easier for travel if we get some folks to travel in. Ideally, I'm going to hit local departments and local municipalities first, but that's not to say that if they're able to take time off of work or come out to our locations, we'd absolutely love to facilitate that, whether that be airfare and lodging. I mean, that's what we're doing for our folks right now. They're coming from all over the place in the U.S. So, one out of Arizona, out of Virginia, out of North Carolina. So all over the place, that they'll be able to fly out to these places. So ideally in 5 to 10 years, we've got 5 locations or 3 to 5 locations. And then hopefully in 20 years, it's all over the place. And that's the vision. That's the plan, is to get these large facilities built up and to hopefully help, per facility, 100 units per year, or 100 participants per year, per facility. So the more we can build, the more we can get, some of our heroes and through the program and help change their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys are going to, be running out of space. You're going to need more and more and more right off the bat. I think this is going to, once this catches on, it's going to catch on like wildfire. I think that people are hurting, especially now. I think that this is actually a pretty timely podcast, given the fact that, I don't know about you, but I think the withdrawal from Afghanistan that felt kind of sudden. I don't know. I mean, I work on base still, so I'm kind of still involved, and a lot of people, are indifferent about the situation. Obviously, it's good that we're not, taking casualties as little as, it's kind of indifferent with most people. And I think that, now that people are back and they're not 100% go all the time, I think that people are really going to start to have to, deal with what's in their head. And I think it's really timely that you guys are coming out right now and are doing this.
I think that's a good point. I actually just had a discussion today with CX Colon Lopez, and we really talked about how right now it's the most dangerous time, because often people don't really know that they are injured, and when I say that, I mean mentally injured, cognitively injured, PTSD, brain injury, until they start slowing down. So, when you're running and gunning and you're TDY and you're deployed all the time and you've got this purpose and you're with your team, it's really easy to miss the signs and symptoms of having some kind of injury, mental or cognitive injury. So now that we are out, things are going to slow down. There's going to be a lot of question of worth. It's going to be really difficult for a lot of people as they reflect on the past, however many years they served.
Right.
So it absolutely is timely. And suicides are already on the rise, and we can expect to see that. But hopefully Shields and Stripes can save quite a few lives down the line, and that's what we intend to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think an analogy I like to use would be, have you guys seen the Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby? So I know you're probably all right. Well, you're probably like, how is this going to tie in? So it's a comedy, obviously, but Ricky Bobby is this on fire NASCAR driver at the time, and when he goes to give an interview, he doesn't know what to do with his hands, and it's kind of like when you take the person out of the job and like you really slow them down, that's when they have the time, the quietness in their head to really think about things. And if they're not, in a great headspace, that's probably the worst time, and that's when you need the most help. So I just like to, keep it light a little bit. But all right, well,
Yeah.
we're coming up on an hour here. So what can people do to help you guys?
There's
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'll touch a little bit of that. There's various ways. Number one, we got three things. Number one is to get the message out there, and to get cast a wide net so that people are can see us, the visibility of us, and what we're trying to do. So as this progresses, we want more and more people to see and recognize who we are and what we're doing. And with that message as it goes out, if they want to help out, if they feel like there's a way that they can help out, they can visit our website, www.shieldsandstripes.org. And there's ways to donate financially if they want to on there. And other ways that they can volunteer their time and their services if they so choose. And then lastly, to be able to pray for our heroes, and really get them the help that they need. And hopefully we don't see a rise on the suicide rates, and we can combat those significantly. Jen, you can touch on some others.
No, I think you got him. Also, I think one thing that's really valuable is that we understand that not everybody has the means to donate, right? So when we're in the startup phase, we need money to get these heroes what they deserve. But sometimes people's network and just, sharing our mission and our vision, if you like what we have to say, sharing it with friends and family members, and then they share it, and then all of a sudden someone who's very wealthy who needs to donate or is looking to donate, we're able to have that kind of conversation. So I think there are multiple ways to help, from monetary donations to service donations to just talking about us. Exactly what you're doing, just trying to get the word out so that people can help us in whatever capacity they're able.
Absolutely. And I will share this as much as possible. I'm going to put a pretty big campaign on this episode just because of how, greatly I feel about what you guys are doing and at Shields and Stripes. And offline, I'll talk to you guys on something else that I'm trying to put together in the works to, get you guys something that's worth something, not just $100. I'm sure you get, like I said to Steve earlier, I'm sure like any amount you guys really appreciate, but I want to give you guys something that's meaningful, and we'll talk a little bit more about that offline and what that will look like. Other than that, I really just want to thank you guys so much. Number one, for your service, and number two, for your service giving back to those who served. It's really commendable and honorable what you guys are doing, and there's a lot of people that are hurting out there, and to have you guys as a person to lean on or a shoulder to lean on is pretty spectacular. So really, thank you guys.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was an honor. Thanks for the discussion.
Let you down.